Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. I'm looking forward to today's episode where we're going to talk about nutrition and its relationship to rehabilitation and performance. Specifically, we're going to go into talking about creatine, protein, timing, how much, and energy drinks. Today, I'm joined by Leslie Bonci, who's a co-founder of Performance 365 with over 35 years of experience as a sports dietitian in professional sports, specifically the NFL, but multiple professional sports, Olympians, collegiate athletes, high school athletes, the entire gamut of sports nutrition. She also has a book where she's the author of Sports Nutrition for Coaches. I'm also joined by Roberta Anding, who's also the co-founder of Performance 365 with her 30-plus year history in collegiate and professional sports. She's the former director of sports nutrition at Texas Children's Hospital, as well as current faculty at Rice University and Baylor College of Medicine. And I'm Phil Plisky, your host. I'm a professor, founder of Coaches Club, and author at philplisky.com, and a performance systems consultant in professional sports. Being a physical therapist, an athletic trainer, and strength and conditioning specialist, we like to come at this from multiple different angles. We want to let you know what the latest research says, but more importantly, we want to unpack it in such a way that you can use it in your practice immediately. Welcome to the Rehab and Performance Lab, the MedBridge podcast where we dive into the world of orthopedics and sports. We're here to unpack the big topics, offering you practical insights and valuable tips from some of the most inspiring professionals in our field. Don't forget to visit medbridge.com to get your continuing education credit for this episode, plus access bonus resources. Welcome to the podcast, Leslie and Roberta.
We are so happy to be here today. And Phil, I just want to say this whole idea of when we are looking at taking it's the interpretation of and the communication to in a practical way. That's what it needs to be. So we're not necessarily talking grams or figures. It's not what people eat. They eat food. And if it is not doable, it's not going to happen, right? Only food if it's in your mouth, not if it sits on your plate.
Agreed. And learning how to organize a plate and helping your athlete to organize a plate. Our job as professionals is to take the science and turn it into food. And so that's the conversation today.
That's fantastic. Well, Leslie, let's get started by just telling us a little bit about your background.
So I have been in this field forever. I'm truly a fossil, and the majority of it spent with active people from the professional level to club teams, everything in between, and pretty much every age. And one of the things that I see across the board is we've got a lot of athletes that are hearing things out there. It's like, how would that work? It's not necessarily appropriate, or it can be downright dangerous because if it sounds too simple, then that can't work for me. Common sense is really at the root of all of this, and there's no shortcuts. If you don't eat, at some point, you are going to suffer some change in your strength, in your speed, in your stamina, in your recovery, in your injury, all of it. So eating is essential. Hashtag feed the need to succeed. That's what we are talking about.
Love it. How about you, Roberta?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in professional sports and was very privileged to take care of what I call peewees to pros. So just like Leslie, I have had experience with little kids in their sports nutrition journey all the way through. And I think the fundamental thing, and Leslie just nailed it, is that people need to be able to have actionable items that are fueled with information, not misinformation. And sadly, in 2025, we've got more misinformation out there. So we all have a really big job in front of us in terms of educating the people who appear in our clinic or in our offices. This is our job.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. This is, I will say, this topic in rehabilitation and performance is probably the one I get from both professionals and clients, athletes. Is about nutrition because everybody in some respects wants the secret formula. And in some respects, I think make it a little bit more complex than maybe necessary. And so I'm hoping that we can maybe set some things straight today. And, again, we're not necessarily dogmatic. We don't all have all the answers, but maybe we can provide some guidance based on the research rather than the latest Instagram reel.
I would agree. And one thing I'm going to add to that is that it's very nuanced, right? Because we all have different food preferences. We all have different gut tolerances. We all have different budgets to spend for the foods that we do. I've got one child who's a PT and his wife is a PT. So two of them in one family, it's a good thing. And when we look at exercise, there's a lot of nuance there, but it's a little bit different and a little bit more clear cut. That is not the way it is with eating.
I think you would be surprised because it's funny because that is one of the things I actually really kind of go about is, hey, when we have someone with a rotator cuff problem, these are some big picture things that we need to look at from everybody perspective, but it still boils down to being systematic with the individual in front of you. So this is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to this. Let's go right into let's hit a big topic right now, a very popular topic, and creatine in the role of performance with creatine. So Leslie, what does the research tell us about creatine and performance?
Yes, maybe. And obviously, that's very vague. But here are some of the things to be aware of. Can creatine have a positive impact on performance? Yes, for particular types of activity, as helping the body have a more readily available source of energy early on for a short-lived activity. Yes. However, I think it's very important for everybody to realize creatine is not lunch. Creatine is not breakfast. If you already are eating a high protein diet that might be providing significant amounts of creatine, it's like double dipping. So there may be some benefit, but this is not the magic bullet in any way, shape, or form. And also, more is not necessarily better. Nobody needs to be doing the loading thing. That's very expensive, but really doesn't result in some positive impact on performance. And I think the last thing, I'll turn it over to my colleague here, is that not everybody responds the same way. Just as we just talked about from an exercise eating perspective, we might have 10 people lined up to take the same dose of creatine, and not everybody is going to say, oh, wow, I feel like my performance is off the chart because of it. That's not the way it works.
So, Roberta, what's the mechanism of action here? Like, what physiologically is happening when we ingest creatine? Like, why? You say we get it from protein, high quality protein sources. It's part of our diet, but why would physiologically supplementing help?
Yeah, it helps to regenerate ATP, right? And so if that's the energy currency of the cell, that's the role of phosphocreatine. So Leslie had kind of alluded to it, but not everybody is a candidate. If you're a long distance runner, I don't know that this is going to be a good supplement for you to invest time and money in, because you're really not talking about that quick burst of energy like you would be if you're a 100-meter sprinter, or you're a thrower where you really need explosive speed. That's the role of creatine. So from a performance standpoint, that's one. From a cognitive standpoint, the way your brain functions, your brain has its own source of creatine. And so with that creatine source in the brain, sometimes taking supplemental creatine can help with cognition. But as Leslie said, sometimes more is not better. And sometimes the challenge is, am I going to have a side effect with this? So I think if I'm looking at it, it's performance, sprinters, possibly cognitive. And the last point I'll make with this is, if you're dealing with someone who is going to be drug tested, they absolutely need to take something that is third-party certified, because that's rolling the dice with their career.
So, not only rolling the dice with your career, let's because this really applies to any supplement and anything we discuss in this entire episode here. If we don't have it third party certified, so NSF certified or other governing bodies, that's just one example. But if we don't have that certified, we don't necessarily know whether it's protein or creatine or vitamin B. We don't necessarily know that it is pure and has everything in it from an intentional perspective or an unintentional perspective. So talk about that importance.
So when we think about that, is I think the goal with supplementation is always safe, smart, selective, sure, right? Those are the four things. And if you don't have that third party verification, that takes away the sure. And that also could take away the safe, because part of having that verification is not just let's slap something on there. No, it is produced in a plant where they are held to a higher standard to ensure that there's no surprises in the product, that every single batch is the same. You're getting the same amount of creatine in every single one of those. All the years I worked in baseball, we said to my players, if somebody gives you something in a plastic bag, throw it away. Do not put that into your mouth, because who knows where that bag has been. I am serious. It isn't worth it to take a chance. We've certainly seen the repercussions of that and consequences of that, of players who've done something, and guess what? You miss a couple of games or the entire season, or something happens in a very negative way to your body, like death. All right. I'm being
Right.
dramatic, but I'm not.
Right.
It isn't worth it. There's enough products out there that have third-party verification so that we can know before we take. And the last thing I'll say about that, even if it has third-party verification, just because you can buy it doesn't mean you should try it.
Right.
Not necessarily. There's a lot of things out there that might have verification, but unless that's going to meet your needs, that's just VEU, very expensive urine. There's no reason to have to do that.
Well,
Yep.
I think that's an important point in that, as we look at this, I do what I do in the pro sports level, and my whole passion is to bring it down to the high school level, right? So let's take what is going great in professional sports and bring it down to the high schooler. And there's two really things I want to draw out of what you just said there is we want to make sure that what we're taking is safe and it isn't something that the guy at the locker next to me gave me or let me use or whatever. And then secondly, because even if you can buy it at a national chain, still doesn't mean it contains what it says it contains. And there's plenty of evidence of that being the case. So even if we're at the high school level, not being drug tested, not a career on the line for it, just our health and safety, it's important that we consider that. Is that true?
Absolutely.
100% agree with that. The piece I'd like to add is that it's gotten a little bit muddier. So we know third-party certification is awesome. We've got NSF, we've got Informed Sport, great options for athletes to search for. There's free apps on your phone for both NSF and Informed Sport, so you can scan the barcode and there you're good to go. The challenge is there's been some problems with products offered through Amazon that are not actually through the company itself. And so the challenge now is you think you're buying product X, but you're not buying product X. So this makes it, a quagmire for athletes to try and figure out. It's like, well, you told me this was a good brand. I scanned it on my phone. I'm good to go. Now you have to actually look at, did the product come from the company itself, or did it come from a third party that just bought the product, slapped a label on it, and it actually is not the product. And so I don't lose sleep over too many things, but working in pro sports, supplementation caused me to lose sleep. It's like, this is your career. And we all know the scenario here. If an athlete tests positive, our brain jumps to, well, he must have stuck a needle in his behind.
Right.
And if you did that, you know what? I want you to get caught. But my experience is there were athletes who tested positive that it was inadvertent, it was unintentional, but the consequence is still there. So I think anybody working with athletes needs to have as their mantra, third party certified. If you're going through an online vendor, you need to make sure it's coming from the country and the country of origin. Is it coming from the right spot?
That makes sense. Well, let's get back to creatine. You talked about it being beneficial in things that require short bursts where we're really turning over that ATP. When we're looking at it, I know a lot of people take it for muscular strength gains, for size gains, for weight gains. Can you talk about that, what the research says about that, Roberta?
Yeah, I think to me, it helps you to get one more in the weight room. Meaning that if you think you can't get that 10th rep and you're struggling to get it, creatine can get you over the top. It doesn't make you strong just by taking creatine. There needs to be a whole dietary approach behind it, and there also needs to be intent. So when I had an athlete who would ask me, should I take creatine? My response was, if I go to your strength coach and ask, are you the hardest working person in the weight room? Is he or she going to say yes or no? It's like, well, I think I'm kind of in the middle. It's like, no, get that cleaned up first. Go get some guidance from your strength and conditioning coach on how you can improve your effort in the weight room. Then we can add creatine for size, endurance, all the things that you're looking at doing. So it's that yes and approach, that yes, I'm going to take creatine, but and I need to have a whole dietary approach, and I need to maximize the brilliance that I'm getting from my strength coach in the weight room.
That's a fantastic. I love that question. That's a great litmus test for should we even enter this conversation? Meaning, are you the hardest person in the weight room? And the second question I heard in that, how dialed in is your current nutrition? Because if you're eating Doritos, Diet Coke, and let's say a McBurger or something, that's we got to start there. Is that what you're saying? Is that, Leslie? Is that right?
Or even if you're doing some kind of a chip and maybe it's a candy and some soda, where's the protein? Because that's not what creatine's doing. It's not the replacement for, it's got to complement the baseline. So it'd be like the analogy of a cupcake, right? The icing is really sweet, but it's the cake. Otherwise, it's just called a glob of icing. And so you need that underlying stuff. That's the foundation. And given the fact that even from a building muscle mass perspective, 90% is the effort you're putting in the weight room, not the hand to mouth activity. That's 10%. So you got to capitalize on whatever that 10 is, and maybe the creatine is the 1%, but that's not in place of the other 10. We can't do the shortcut. We can't just go right to the bottle without thinking about what's in the fridge.
So one of the ways I've heard one of my colleagues characterize creatine was one of the things that he sees in the weight room as a frequent mistake is not enough rest time between sets, meaning we have to get our physiology a chance to recover. And if you're not able to do the same number of reps as the previous set, the reason is because you haven't given enough rest time. And if creatine does something in that area, that's probably a strong area that it does, is compresses the window of the need for the rest time, so you could get potentially more workout in, more load over time. Is that a fair characterization? Another angle of creatine?
Oh, I would say yes. I think that's a good way of looking at it. I think the other misconception with the use of creatine is that if I use creatine and I eat protein, carbohydrate is not important anymore. And carbohydrate is still the gas in the tank. So sometimes when I see athletes unable to finish a set, it could be the rest. And I would ask my strength conditioning teammates, do they need a little bit more rest in between? Or it could be they're flat out dehydrated, or they came into the weight room because their lift was at 6 a.m. They came into the weight room dehydrated and underfueled. So I think all of that, when you're assessing how does creatine work, it works in conjunction with other macronutrients, also works in conjunction with, am I hydrated? I live in Texas, hotter than the sun. Nobody's hydrated in Texas. I'm making a bold statement. Now, one person is hydrated in the state of Texas. So I see athletes coming in gassed in the morning. They're just gassed. So is creatine helpful? Sure it is, but you got to have the whole enchilada. You can't just have a piece of it.
That's right.
So with that said, that is a great concept there in that, again, I think what I've heard is, first of all, there's some big rocks that we need to make sure are moved out of the way before we even consider what we're doing with creatine. And then secondly, there's some even smaller rocks that go along with that. Probably, like, it makes creatine such a small component compared to all the other things, like it's an additive thing. It's a competitive advantage potentially in an already optimized system, it does not optimize a poor system.
It's the elective. You can't really go right to the elective without doing the core. And the core's part of this is, am I optimally hydrated? Am I doing what I need to do in the weight room? And am I eating the things I need to eat? And if the answer is yes to all of those, then okay, it's a consideration. That doesn't mean we throw all those other things away, but that would be the progression of going to it that way instead of let's just reroute around and let's just go right to the creatine and not pay attention to anything else. That is not going to work.
Yeah, and
That makes a ton of sense. Now, as we look at this, so, bottom line with that is, hey, we have a lot of athletes. I know there's a lot of athletes, even in my household, who are doing 5 in the morning, 6:30 in the morning lifts. So we have to be very intentional about, hydrating and nutrition fueling before we even necessarily get to that lift. Now, let's talk about safety of creatine. This is a very well studied, probably, dare I say, one of the most studied supplements besides protein. Out there. And tell me about the safety, what the research says, and then maybe we'll get into a little nuance beyond that.
I think the good news about this is it's safe. It is safe, but safe doesn't mean necessary. It means that it's safe. And again, kind of back to the which product. If it's not safe, it's because of what you chose as your creatine source that wasn't third party verified. So some surprise in the creatine we're looking for, that could be a problem. But the other thing is that sometimes the assumption is more is better. And that is certainly not the case. We don't have to go for the more. The goal is a baseline level for most people is going to be fine. So it's that 3 to 5 grams a day, not I got to do 20 grams of loading each and every day. We don't have to do it. And not necessarily because it's unsafe, it's unnecessary. And it's potentially crowding out something else. That's when it goes into the margin of, well, maybe not safe because I didn't take my carbohydrates because I'm bloated from my creatine. So that's the unintended consequence of potentially taking more than we need to take.
And I think to add on to that is that there's over 200 clinical studies showing the safety of creatine. And there are things that I just wish would go away. Creatine is not a steroid. So I hear this from parents all the time. And I think that came from the loading dose. Do 20 grams for this amount of time. And it sounds like a stack when you start to analyze it. So it doesn't work that way. So I think from my perspective, oftentimes dealing with high school athletes, parents will look at this as a magic bullet, not understanding that the challenge here is not all teenagers mature at the same rate. So you can have someone that looks like a grown up like LeBron James at 15, and then someone at 15, Michael Jordan, who is scrawny. And some of that is just developmental. So I think sometimes I see parents throwing more supplements at their children, thinking that everyone is going to be the same. And then it's like, ooh, but am I providing an anabolic steroid? So I wish some of those questions, Phil, would absolutely go away. It is not a steroid. It's a nitrogenous compound. And the people who don't get results are some of the people that we already talked about that are not taking care of their house. But that other group is teenagers who are just not physically mature. They can get stronger on creatine. They can get stronger with a lift. They're just not going to get the muscular hypertrophy that they thought they were going to get. And honestly, it's that age group, the people that are late matures, the boys who are late matures, that are much more likely to look for anabolic steroids because they look at it themselves and say, I don't look like anybody else.
Right.
I'm
Or,
working.
or I feel like that's my ticket to
There you
college,
go.
or that
Perfect.
type of thing. And one of the things, let's talk about, so the research says it's safe. Let me talk about maybe a little bit of my clinical experience. And I don't disagree with the research. But like everything, maybe it's a little bit more nuanced. Sometimes I'm seeing, so creatine has one thing that it causes intramuscular water to increase, right? So it has an intramuscular water effect. I'm seeing in some athletes, just some, not all, maybe an increase in muscle strains that are, maybe not your typical muscle strain, or it happens a little bit more often. Talk to me about your experience on that. Is that like, hey, Phil, now that's an N of one, we're not seeing that at all? Or the research doesn't fully point to that, but maybe in some studies we're seeing something. Let's talk about that nuance.
I'll jump in with that. I saw it with higher doses in the individuals who were using 20 grams. And if you go from 0 to 20 grams, and now you made that muscle heavier with fluid, it can easily misbehave. So I'm not a 20-gram person. I think in a collegiate athlete, the most I would ever recommend is 5, sometimes as much as 10. And I would tell them, I don't care what you got from the health food store. You don't need to load it, and you don't need to get rid of it in the off season. Just take 20 grams when you need something like that.
5
But
grams
that's
when you
very
need
few
something.
people. No, but that's very few people who would need 20 grams.
Okay, I see what you're
Sometimes in a
saying. Yeah.
rehab setting, I might go 20 grams.
Yeah.
But in reality, most people are going to do fine with 5. They're
So
going
it
to do,
makes sense then that we
yes,
could see that with excessive loading or maybe undernutrition or underhydration.
there you
Is
go.
that Leslie, what do you think about that?
I do, and I think one of those concerns it sometimes is the false sense of security. Oh, I feel like I can do more because I took
Yes.
creatine, but I really wasn't well nourished or hydrated enough before. But I'm going to push myself to do more and stay in the weight room longer. But and all of a sudden the muscles are like, yes, but you did
Yeah.
not give me the fuel and the hydration I need, and that in and of itself can increase the risk of injury. So it's not making creatine out to be bad, but it's not the panacea either. And can we check off the boxes for all?
Let's make sure those other things are very much in place if we're gonna
Correct.
use creatine.
Yes.
That makes a ton of sense, both applying the research and the entirety of practice there. So, Roberta, you mentioned dosing for rehabilitation
Yeah.
or potentially considering for rehabilitation. Is there a benefit for and I'm thinking particularly maybe, surgeries, we talk about baseball, whether that's, recovering from Tommy John or ACL reconstruction. Is there potential benefit there?
To me, there is. And in all the rehab protocols that I have designed, some of it is how significant is the injury. If the injury is significant, I've seen catastrophic injuries, as I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast. That to me changes the dosing. It changes the dosing for vitamin C. It changes the dosing. So there's a difference for wellness, what you need to do to just maintain normal health, and what you need to do for rehab. So, protein is an example. If somebody is injured, the protein needs go up above and beyond what you would need for wellness. So, if I'm dealing with an athlete with repeat concussions, they're losing time on the field. I'm going to go and push those doses up to see whether or not I get a therapeutic benefit. And that's where I might use 20 grams of creatine as part of a concussion rehab protocol, because now the brain is injured. It's misfiring. We don't really think about it as injured, but it is. It's misfiring, and we're going to load a dose a little bit differently than we would if somebody sprained a finger. So to
Well,
me,
the energy demands of the brain after
huge,
concussion go way up.
huge.
Yes.
Absolutely. So at rest, your brain takes about 20% of your calorie needs. During a traumatic brain injury, it can go up to 40%. So that little 5-pound thing that's sitting in your cranium now has this huge energy demand. So the rules are different from healthy and well to injured and rehab. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that what we're trying to do is get somebody back to normal and the dose is higher.
That makes a ton of sense. So you mentioned, okay, the brain uses creatine for energy. You mentioned that there's emerging research on brain health, maybe in older individuals, that type of thing. Can you speak to that research a little bit, Roberta?
Yeah, I think for older individuals, I think if you look at anybody probably over the age of 50, they're all concerned about, dementia, Alzheimer's, the rest of it. And so when we start to take a look at overall brain health, in general, if you're trying to simplify this, what's good for your heart is also good for your brain. So omega-3 fatty acids, you could look at that. You could look at vitamin D as the head coach or the CEO controlling any cell in your body that has a nucleus has a receptor for vitamin D. Protein needs are also really important. So again, if it's good for your heart, it's also good for your brain.
Leslie, what would be the recommended? Now, we're not prescribing any medical advice here or dietary advice for anybody, but does creatine act? We've got a blood-brain barrier
Mhm.
that's in play here and things like that. Is dosing different? Is the thought process different from a muscular perspective?
Yeah, and it may be. Some of the studies that are looking at this saying at a minimum 10 up to 20 grams is what it might take for creatine when we're looking from a cognitive perspective, and also realizing cognitive is very nuanced as well. How do you define that? And are we starting with somebody who has a perfectly normal brain, or, my favorite movie, Young Frankenstein, Abby normal brain, or whatever it is? But, all of these things, I'm being facetious, but, what impact is it? Does it necessarily restore total brain function in people that have Alzheimer's? That's not what the studies are showing. It may some aspects of memory, but it's not the same in everybody. So that is also very nuanced, because it won't always be the same response. And realize that creatine is one of those things. What else? Are we
Right.
dehydrated as we're getting older? Because sometimes that's an issue, right? As people get older, their fluid they stop. Or how are they eating? Maybe all of a sudden they're an empty nester or widower, whatever. They don't want to cook anymore. There's so many variables that are there. It would be so easy to say, oh, honey, just take creatine. That's an easy thing to say, but is that necessarily the best advice to be giving? And then I think we also do need to think about the cost, kind of the elephant in the room. As people get older, and it's not inexpensive to buy things. And if you're going to buy this, is that potentially in place of something else? Are you consistent with using it? Because if you're not, this is another problem. This is the real practical stuff. That's my world. These are the things that I deal with all the time. But I think that's part of the checklist of the questions that as practitioners, we need to be asking our patients. If they are going to use it, you got to use it the right way. You don't get brownie points just because you bought it. We really need a decision tree. How should I be using that? And it's a little bit more complicated than just take a pill.
Yeah.
Well,
And
it sounds like it's no different than the athlete in that,
Yeah.
hey, this creatine could be a wonderful complement, to, are you exercising? Are you getting aerobic exercise? Are you strength training? Are you hydrating? Do you have a well-balanced nutrition? Are you getting enough protein? Suddenly, when I put all those factors together, have I not hit brain health, heart health, physical health, all in arthritis, all in one? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Right.
I
And
think
it's not either or, right? It isn't just one of those things. You have to be doing all of those things as part of that, creating a healthy selfie. So we can't just bypass all of that just to get to the end point.
You're filling my vocabulary with all these great healthy selfie, man. I tell you what, this is I'm going to annoy my children with these things now. So
I am every day. So, join the club. It's all good.
that's great. Well, if we're talking about this total package, I think we would be remiss talking about performance and health, and whether we're talking about athletic performance, rehabilitation, or aging well. Protein has to be in this mix. So, Roberta, what there is, I don't know. I love all the as we talk about all the different social media influences about timing of protein, how much protein, and do I need to supplement protein? Let's start with those questions with the athlete.
Yeah. How much time do you have, Phil? So when we look at protein needs, they change throughout the life cycle. Anytime there's growth and development, there's going to be an increased need for protein. I I think practically speaking, I still recommend that people try and get protein 3 meals a day. I think there's been some recent challenge to that mindset by a researcher by the name of John Tromulin, who said, maybe you can go 100 grams at one time. That's a lot of protein. Maybe you can go 100 grams at one time. Maybe the timing is not as important as the amount. But when you start thinking about adding more protein or increasing protein needs, and Leslie mentioned this, I think oftentimes we don't think about the cost. And are we recommending really expensive sources of protein? So I think probably everybody is familiar with social determinants of health. And if individuals don't have enough money, you better start recommending some cost effective ways of getting that protein. Now, 2025, eggs are a little bit less expensive than they were before. Beans are inexpensive. Nuts are not really less expensive, and they're not probably the best source, but you can start to think of ways of getting more protein on the plate. But I like to set people up for consistency.
Yeah.
Have protein at breakfast, have protein at lunch, have protein at dinner. And I think even though the research is a little fuzzy on this, I think that does make sense to get people into that healthy habit.
Doesn't that make sense from a we can look at the research on just protein alone, but whether we involve supplements or involve any nutrient, basically, doesn't it make sense that the other research says as long as it's available for the body when it needs it, then we're okay. And what would make something available for the body when it needs it is consistent ingestion of it over not only the day, but over the week, over the month, where we're not just ramming a lot of protein at one point in time and then not doing it. And then, just kind of the body doesn't really respond to spikes very well. As we kind of talked about this in the creatine, like, hey, it just needs to be available for when the body needs it. Leslie, let's talk about that.
Well, and taking that one step further, yes, consistency, meaning trying to not eat in the shape of a Nike swoosh where it's little, eat a steer. All right. We don't really
Right.
want to do that. I think I always tell my athlete is play to your weaknesses. If you're already having a decent amount of protein at dinner, let's not worry about that one, but let's think about what's not happening at breakfast. Or the athlete that doesn't have a salad for lunch with 4 chickpeas. Okay, that's not going to be enough. So I think the second component of this is quality, is what is the bioavailability? What is the utilizable component of that protein? And this really comes to light when we're talking about people that are plant-based. Of course, we're dietitians. We want people to eat plants, but I think it's critically important to understand that, 1 tablespoon of bean or hummus, that is not the same as eating a 3-ounce piece of chicken or fish or meat. You don't have to eat the flesh, but you got to get the needs met. And that means considerably more bean at that eating occasion. That's the part that kind of gets lost in translation. So they're not all the same in terms of the quality, and underlying all of that, we've got to optimize leucine. And, it isn't the same. There's not like everybody's about collagen in the coffee. It's extremely poor quality protein, extremely poor, very pricey. I mean, you would have to use probably 20 packets of it. And at that point, you've depleted the whole can and now you're done. For the rest of the week.
And your wallet.
It just doesn't work. But that's what people are hearing. So it's like this cherry picking information because of this influencers that are saying all this craziness. So we have to do it in an affordable way, but we have to be consistent. And then we have to think about the quality. All 3 of those are critically important.
So if we talk about timing, we're saying be consistent, high quality, then in general, what's a starting point? Now, I fully understand that a 15-year-old going through a growth spurt while doing a high-performance weightlifting routine is different than a 45-year-old male who's not doing anything. We have different protein needs there, but can we recommend a starting point? Again, it's not the end all be all. It's not individualized, but is there a starting point? Because I think there's a lot of information out there that says, oh my gosh, you should be doing 2 grams per pound of body weight, or you should be doing, that's way too much, or 0.25 is plenty. Is there a starting point we can think about?
So first of all, and just to piggyback on what it is that you just said, we might have a 45-year-old who's trying to decrease body fat, and actually protein needs are higher because you really don't want to be losing muscle. Hey, Biggest Loser, talking to you. I mean, all those kinds of things. Or somebody has had an injury, or even as we're seasoned and we get older, our protein needs don't go down. They actually go up. So it isn't just the 15-year-old that has to get the needs met. It's across the board. When I talk to my patients, I really, as a very simple way of starting with this, is to maybe look somewhere between 20, 30 grams. So what does that look like? It's about the size of a smartphone. That's what that amount is. So this is not, the size of a large computer screen. This is the size of a hand. That's what it is. Whether that is coming from a food item, like something like a Greek Icelandic yogurt. I mean, those are great. They're a very significant source of protein that's there. Cottage cheese, love it or hate it, it's a terrific source of protein. The little can of tuna or salmon or chicken, a couple of eggs, all those things work well. Or if it is going to be something like using a supplement as a protein isolate, it's not necessarily the mass gainer where it's a vat. and the scoop is the size of our head. You don't have to do that. More is not necessarily better because we also have to put other things on that plate. That recipe for building a muscle, you need some carbohydrate as part of that. You need to have some fat as part of it. It's just not about some powder that we snort and hope for the best. We really have to think about everything there. Yes, protein in vegetables. Yes, there's protein in some grains. Yes, there is protein in nuts and seeds. Not a lot, but there is. Yes, there's protein in beans. So there's a lot of things that are contributing to that number that's on the plate to get us to where it is we need to be. And then that's the cookie cutter. Am I doing that as part of every meal? As Roberta said, the idea of building the plate, that's what we are looking for.
I love that concept of having, it is part of the plate, not just a total number or just a number in and of itself, because I think we get the wrong focus with that. Just like we think that creatine is going to be the end all be all, it's just simply part of a lot of other things that we're doing, and really a small part if we're not doing all the other things. So with that said, though, is there a point that we should think about? Okay, if we're at 20 per plate, is there a body relative way that we can say, okay, at least be sure you're getting this? If you're lifting weights, regardless of your age, is there something that we can kind of hang our hats on that say, hey, here's a range? Roberta, what do we think?
Yeah, I think you hear all the time a gram of protein per pound of body weight, and that's going to overshoot for some people. So for Leslie's really great analogy of how much protein should be on the plate, I think that almost is a disservice, because for some people that's too much, and some people that actually might be too little. Again, if you're injured or sick or have had major surgery, that in my impression is not going to be enough. I've seen individuals who are injured need up to 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, given the significance of their injuries. So I think that size of a cell phone or a smartphone is actually really helpful. And for all of us, that is actually called adult learning theory. You link something that is unknown, how many grams of protein do you need, to a known, the size of your cell phone. Now, when I go to the cafeteria at school, I'll think, oh, I need to get a piece of chicken that's about the size of my cell phone. It can't be 2 bites of chicken on my Caesar salad. I'm going to need to do something different. The other key thing that I think Leslie put in here is the quality is important, and the leucine content, that's an essential amino acid. That leucine content is critical because that's the protein anabolism. That's the muscle anabolism light switch. It flips on the light switch to say, let's go ahead and make muscle protein. So for our plant-based athletes, it's hard for them to get a decent amount of leucine. So again, plants, awesome. Agree with Leslie. We want them on the plate. But if we're really trying to build lean body mass, we probably need to focus in on not only are we getting the amount, are we getting adequate amounts of leucine that is going to come from dairy and animal-based sources.
So, again, we talked about individualization, and without getting into, the specific individual in front of us, is there a way to know if I'm an athlete and I'm doing all the stuff that we talked about in the first part of this episode?
Mm-hmm.
I'm hydrating, I'm weightlifting, I'm the best weightlifter in the weight room. Is there a way to know that the cell phone is enough for me per meal? Or, what would be those signs or symptoms that say, you probably should increase your protein intake, Leslie?
Yeah, and so I think a lot of this depends upon the goals that somebody has, right?
Mhm.
So if somebody says, my goal is I'm trying to put on some mass and get bigger, and I'm kind
Yeah,
of,
let's assume that. Let's assume that they want to put on mass and get bigger.
yeah, then it, they might need to have a little bit more protein, but B, are they getting in enough calories overall? So I'll add a scoop of protein isolate, and that's 80 calories. Okay, you're adding in the protein, but calorically, that might not work. So we might
Right.
have to make some other adjustments. I need to have more carbohydrate. I need to have more fat. The other thing that I think it's really important to mention is all those ways that people kind of assume everything's equal. So if I go to the dairy aisle in the grocery store, well, I can buy cow's milk. All right, this is coming out of an animal with teats, or I can buy almond milk. You don't milk an almond. There's nothing to milk. And so, but
It's just a little bit smaller process is all it is.
They're all the same, and they're not the same, right? So that's, well, it's in my glass and it's equal and it's not. Or, oh, I want to be gluten-free. Gluten is the protein component of wheat, rye, barley, and oats. So, we think we're doing the right things all the time. And indeed, we might be shortchanging ourselves a little bit depending upon what it is we're choosing. Or I'll just do 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. That's 7 grams of protein. Are you really going to have 6 tablespoons of peanut butter at a time? Most people probably not. So this is
I don't think you appreciate how much I like peanut butter.
yeah, I do. Yes, I do too.
I
Right.
do. I like 6 tablespoons is
Nothing.
nothing.
No problem.
That's,
No problem.
Job is
that's
start
just getting started.
open my mouth. That's it.
I love it. I love it. Hey, well, let's talk about one of the things we haven't hit on is in watching your MedBridge course on the myths in nutrition. I love the way you talked about energy drinks, Leslie. You said these are not a lot of times not energy drinks. You use the word stimulant drinks. Talk more about that.
Yeah, I actually was talking to the freshman dancers at Point Park University this morning. Every one of them had something in their hand that would
All of that.
that, and they put them all down. Amazingly, hooray! So thank God. They probably picked them up after we were done.
Yeah, for sure. They just waited until you walked out of the room.
Absolutely.
But because it's a very attractive term. Everybody wants more energy. Ooh, that's plastered on the front, therefore. And when we talk about this as dietitian, energy is calories. That's really what it is at a baseline level. So if I pick up a product that says it's an energy drink and I look at the back and it says 0 calories, that's an oxymoron. That's not a source of energy. That's the stimulant because it's caffeine, whether that's the little shots, whether that's something in a larger can, it doesn't matter. And it's not necessarily saying that caffeine is bad, but it's not the replacement for, because it truly isn't providing the energy to the body. And in our younger athletes, we really worry about, and our older athletes, how much are you having of these things every day? If I take a shot that says it's giving me 5 hours of energy, but it has 5 calories, I'm doing the math here. That means we get 1 calorie per hour. No, you're not energized. You are duped right there. That is not working. But my heart's racing. Therefore, I'm energized. No, you're stimulated. Not one and the same.
So we've somewhat normalized energy drinks, like as if I gave a high schooler and said, "Here's your stimulant pill," the parents would be all over, right? Like that would be a big deal. But if we say it's an energy drink,
That's okay.
it's okay now because that's a kind of a big deal. So Roberta, let's talk about, we can quickly consume, 2 energy drinks in a day, and maybe it is not even just 2 energy drinks in a day, but if we're taking 200 milligrams, which is I think about average for most quote unquote stimulant drinks, and how quickly we're consuming that, like that is, the one thing about coffee is, first of all, the per ounce for most standard coffee is way less than an energy drink.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot harder to drink. Like I don't see a lot of people taking a hot cup of coffee and just pounding it, right? Because it's so we're getting it at a
no, Phil, we can do that. No, I mean, we don't.
So talk to me about the dangers of that, of okay, maybe I inadvertently get a couple, 2, 3 of these in a day, or I'm taking them over a short period of time. What are the dangers of that?
Yeah,
Roberta?
I actually had a basketball player end up in the ER because he had signs and symptoms of a heart attack. And when it came down to it, he started first thing in the morning because he had a 5 a.m. practice, had an energy drink there, then he had to go to class, then he went back to practice in the afternoon. So when you looked at how many milligrams of caffeine he was getting, it was 1,000. And now he's having palpitations and shortness of breath and tightness in his chest. And I think because it's called an energy drink, and to Leslie's great comment, doesn't have any calories, so it really doesn't supply energy, somehow we look at those as benign. So in the pro teams that I worked with, one of the pro teams banned energy drinks in the clubhouse, was not allowed to bring it in. So what we did
Can
was...
we say that for the people in the back again? Say that what a protein did?
Yeah, we banned them. There was no energy drinks. That didn't mean players didn't drink them, but we had an alternative. So we bought really fancy coffees. We bought an espresso machine. I let the players say, this is the coffee that I would like to try. So I had professional athletes sipping on espresso, 100 milligrams of caffeine. And then I could say, you know what? The evidence is individuals who drink coffee have a reduced risk factor for type 2 diabetes and a reduced risk factor for liver cancer. So I'm actually promoting your health, where the only thing I'm going to do with a stimulant drink is increase the likelihood that you're going to the ER. So it's exactly what I say to parents. You don't want your kids drinking coffee before they go to school, but you'll go out to and buy cases of these energy drinks and not think about it. So there's stimulants, increase heart rate, increase blood pressure, GI distress, the whole 9 yards, and we look at those as normalized. It's okay to have an energy drink.
And I think the other component of that is the half-life of caffeine is
Yes.
4 to 8 hours. So there is big problems in terms of potential sleep disruption. So if we have kids that have an evening game, evening basketball game, whatever it is, oh, I need this at 5 or I need 2, I'll take 400 milligrams at 5. That means 4 hours later, half of that is still in the body. And you've got to wait till that caffeine clears until you're actually able to rest. So, you're lying down and you're like, this is not conducive to a good night's sleep. Nobody's thinking about that. And then the other thing is sometimes you really have to be the detective to figure out how much caffeine is in these, because it isn't always apparent. It's not on the front of the label. You're kind of digging around on the back with, a little magnifying glass to figure out. And even then, it's a crapshoot if it is always apparent, because it isn't.
Love it. So basically, we need to go back to our bottom line of everything else is if you are feeling sluggish, let's look at your sleep. Let's look at your hydration. Let's look at your nutrition. It's probably that you're not lacking a stimulant. It's probably that you're probably lacking in one of those other areas.
100%. And unfortunately, in the world we live in, we all want a quick fix. We all want something that is going to solve our problem without effort. And saying, balance your plate, eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, hydrate. Everybody has heard it. So that's almost on deaf ears. So everybody wants the magic bullet. Everybody wants what's new, what's sexy. And I'm going to invest money in that because I don't want to do the hard work of getting up 30 minutes earlier and having a real breakfast before I leave the house in the morning.
And the other thing is just is what, because of a stimulant. So what is that doing? So your heart's racing and you're breathing more rapidly. What happens when you start to exercise? Oh, your heart races and you breathe more rapidly. We had this happen a couple of years ago with one of my professional football team. 120 degrees on the field. A couple of guys had had some of these energy drinks ahead of time, hadn't necessarily eaten enough, and to the ER they went. And let me tell you, that doesn't make coaches happy when things are preventable, because I'm doing this. This is my shortcut. That's an unintended consequence. Luckily, everybody was healthy, but would agree with this. As much as the bells and whistles are incredibly attractive, sometimes we just have to have the big old gong.
Yep.
We have to do that first before we do those other things.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
100%.
So, all right, let's go into maybe some application of this and take us through one case where I've got a person who has had a major surgery like an ACL reconstruction, and they come in and they've got energy drink in hand, and I'm also concerned about their nutrition. How do I, as a rehabilitation professional, start thinking about this?
Oh, I think that's probably more common than not. My experience is that anybody who's had a major surgery like that is so concerned, and I'm going to use this word, they're so concerned about getting fat that they're going to restrict their calories, thinking that, you know what, I don't need to gain weight, not understanding that crutching, having to crutch across campus or crutching can increase your calorie needs by 20-25%. So now I've got someone coming in an energy deficit with an energy drink. And I think as a rehab specialist, it's within your scope of practice to say, can you tell me what you had for breakfast this morning? Well, I didn't have time. Huh. Could you have had a ham and cheese sandwich? And again, I get it. If you're only operating on one leg, you may not want to stand and make a hot breakfast. I get that.
Right.
Could you make sandwiches ahead of time and just take them out of the freezer. Yes, turkey freezes, it gets a little bit change in texture. But this is the whole world of Uncrustables, right? People buy Uncrustables because they're frozen peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. That is better than nothing. So it could be a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a banana, and a glass of milk, and you're on your feet for maybe 30 seconds. So helping athletes to navigate, here's what's going on. The other thing that I think we don't oftentimes ask is, are you constipated? Because
Mm,
pain meds constipate you. Who wants to eat when they're constipated? Nobody. So to me, the rehab starts before the OR. So I would have protocols. Athletes needed to have the we called it a package, the surgical package, and part of the surgical package was something to help them go.
yeah,
Because I don't want to eat if I can't have a bowel movement. I don't want to do that. So being that detective, as Leslie mentioned earlier, I think is really important. What are the barriers? See a lot of college athletes saying, you know what? I just couldn't make it to the dorm. Okay. Is there a way that someone within the dorm can deliver a meal to you?
right.
Because trying to navigate any college campus becomes problematic. So I think the rehab specialist can always ask the question, what did you have before you came? And
And that the prescription for PT, so we'll use that a little differently and talk about the proscription.
there
And
you
the
go.
proscription being, what are you doing in terms of your nutrition? Because not only does that help you optimize the work that you're putting forth when you're in PT, but it might get you back sooner to what
There you
you
go.
wanted to do. So that's the dangling carrot, right? Or the dangling leucine that we look at. If we have to give people incentives, because otherwise they're not going to do it. And I'm a very big believer in giving people the why to try,
Yep.
not just do it, but here's the why. It
There's
might be,
another one, Leslie. Why
Yep,
to
why to
try?
try. But I
Love it.
think I think
All
it's
right. Well,
fundamentally
this
important.
has gone so fast for me. I think we could talk for hours, maybe days.
Days.
But we've got to wrap this up. What are the 3 actionable takeaways that you guys want clinicians to know that they can implement in their practice?
I would say the first thing is ask questions. Is you're not going to know unless you ask. So we're not asking anybody listening to this to be the registered dietitian. Can refer to a registered dietitian. We would appreciate that. But if we don't ask the question, then we're not necessarily going to help our athletes, our patients to get back to their state of wellness that
Mhm.
they want to be.
Yep,
Roberta?
and I would throw in there are free downloadable, options out there. The Athlete's Plate that comes from the International Olympic Committee, is a great resource, and you can download it, and so it becomes part of your educational tool that you can say, "Well, this is what your plate needs to look like." And so I always go with the moderate activity when somebody's rehabbing, but you can look at this and say, did you have enough protein on your plate? Did you have fruits and vegetables? Did you have a whole grain? And now you've given them something visual. You can find it in English and Spanish, depending on who your client is. But I think that's an actionable step. And that's wellness. That is in the domain of other professionals. You can't prescribe medical nutrition therapy, but you can talk to people about plate organization. And as dietitians, we would appreciate that you do, because now everybody's on the same team. We're helping that athlete meet their own professional goals, and you are staying within the scope of your practice.
And I think the third thing would be consistency.
Yep.
That it's not what you do one day. It's not what people do before games or
Mhm.
competitive events. It's what are you doing consistently every day? Not expecting anybody to be perfect because we can never define eating that way. But if you say, okay, my goal is over my working hours, I am going to try, or my waking hours, I'm going to try and eat 4 times. That means Monday 4 times, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Is being as consistent as we can also establishes a habit and help to prevent some of these deficits from occurring because we're giving the body a chance to be nourished across the day.
I love it. One of the things I'll add in on that takeaway is whether we're talking when we're asking very specific questions about protein or creatine or supplement X or supplement Y, there are a lot of things that probably precede that are infinitely more important than a particular question about a supplement. So let's ask some questions about what is our hydration? What does our plate look like? What does our work ethic look like in the gym? That was a big takeaway for me. So I love that. To wrap things up, what are you guys currently working on?
A book? We're we're actually writing a book because we didn't have enough to do, and it really wasn't on our bucket list, but it's there now. So yes, we are writing a book for non-nutrition majors, and it's going to be a little different than anything else that's out there because it's the voice of the fossils coming in saying, "How would that work?" So we're going to combat some of the misinformation, and not the goal is not to make anybody a registered dietitian; it's to really help them understand and augment their practice by this understanding of how critically important the hand-to-mouth activity is.
Absolutely. And we're very excited with our relationship with MedBridge
Yes.
and hope to develop more courses based on need and demand. So we're very excited about working with MedBridge in the future.
Well,
Yes.
we're very thankful to have you on board here. Well, this is awesome. How can people connect with you?
Well, we have a website under construction, and so it is Performance 365 is our website, so you can find us there, and we would appreciate follows on social media because we're on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, um, Twitter or X, and we're just not on TikTok. I think that's the only one we're not on. We're not
No,
on
because
TikTok.
we're ticked off all the
We're
time, so
ticked
we
off all
can't
the
be.
time, so TikTok doesn't fit our personalities.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, if you'd like to connect with me to find out what I'm working on or different information or what's interesting to me or what I'm learning, you can connect with me at all the different social media platforms or at philplisky.com. Thank you guys so much for the episode today. It was amazing. So interesting.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. So we loved it.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I look forward. Hopefully, maybe we can have you back sometime. Until then, let's keep building the future of rehabilitation and performance together. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Rehab and Performance Lab by MedBridge. Please be sure to subscribe and listen to more of our episodes on Spotify or your favorite podcast platform and at medbridge.com. If you're listening outside of the MedBridge catalog and would like to access the bonus resources and receive continuing education credit, simply log into your MedBridge account and search for this episode to find the accreditation details. Rehab and Performance Lab also listens to you. If there's a particular clinician that you'd like to hear from, or if you have a clinical question or a challenge that you'd like to see addressed on this podcast, please let us know by leaving a comment on our Instagram post or by emailing podcast@medbridge.com. See you next time.